Chapter 11, Project Management. In this chapter, we're going to look at general concepts of project management and specifically two different approaches to project management, and they are called PERT and CPM. PERT stands for Project Evaluation Review Technique, and CPM stands for Critical Path Method. We'll talk more about these two methods, the similarities and the differences in just a second. So here are the learning objectives, and this is the outline. So we're going to discuss about PERT CPM, then PERT and cost, budgeting, and then what is called project crashing. It doesn't mean that we're going to crash the project, but crashing here simply means trying to reduce the or trying to finish the project at the most timely fashion. Or is there a benefit for spending more money to finish the project early? Because oftentimes projects have specific due dates and bonuses if you can finish earlier than the due date, and penalties for finishing later than the due dates. So there may be some economic benefit for spending more money on certain activities in the project than what is necessary so that it can be finished earlier than normal. So those are the kinds of things that we will be talking about in project crashing. Okay, so we start with a brief introduction. Okay, projects are characterized by processes that involve many diverse skill levels, diverse technologies, diverse production processes, and all of these come together in a timely fashion such that the project gets completed successfully within budget and within schedule. So examples can vary from event planning, for example, that could be a project like River Bend, or it could be construction of buildings like the UTC library that was built. That is a project. Or building sophisticated technologies. iPhone, the first iPhone that was designed and produced, that could be a project. So the common factor in all of these activities that are characterized as project is various diverse activities requiring a variety of technologies, skills. Let's take, for example, building a house. Building a house is a project, okay, and it involves a variety of tasks, starting from architecture, design of the house, plan of the house, getting it approved. So even in the initial stages, now you're looking at engineering skills, legal skills, and artistic skills for architectural activities. And once the plans are approved, then you have site preparation, then digging. Okay, that requires a particular type of skill set and equipment and technology. And then laying the foundation would involve different kind of technologies and skills. And then building the walls, and building the roof, doing mechanical work and electrical work. So you see, even in a fairly straightforward project like building a house, you have many variety of activities requiring a diverse set of skills and diverse set of technologies, and they all will have to be arranged in a particular order. There are some predecessor and successor relationships. You cannot start site preparation before the plan gets approved by the municipal authorities. You cannot lay the foundation before digging for the foundation. You cannot build the first floor, you cannot build the second floor before you build the first floor, that kind of thing. So after making those plans, then you have to schedule the activities and then monitor the activities. And there are two things that are important in project management: time and money. So you have to schedule for time, when each activity should begin and when each activity should end, and then monitor to see whether they start and end as planned. And then the second thing is money, dollars, budget. So again, at the time of planning, you should come up with a budget, or for the entire duration of the project, and make sure that those funds are made available at the right time. Okay. And then monitor the expenditure to see whether the project cost is within budget, or is a cost, are there cost overruns or cost underruns, and that kind of stuff. So the first step in project planning is to take the entire project and break it down into what are called activities. This is called work breakdown structure. So identify activities that must be performed at each stage of the project. Okay, and of course there will be at least one activity at the beginning. That could be more than one, and again there would be at least one activity that marks the end of the project, and there could be more than one at the end of the project also. And then for each activity we have to identify how long it will take, duration for the activity, and how much it will cost. Okay, and there is more about cost that we have to talk about. Like for instance, I mentioned that there is a possibility that if you spend more money, you may be able to complete the activity in a shorter duration of time. So that's called project crashing. So we'll talk more about that a little later. And then all the resources required: technology, equipment, manpower, engineering resources, and so on. And for each of those activities, then we have to determine what are the immediate predecessor activities that must be completed. Okay, so for each activity, you will identify the predecessors. Once you have all of that, then we can set it up as a project network, and we can use the network to develop the schedule and the budget, etc. Okay. So we'll be using two different methodologies. Okay, program evaluation review technique, so that's your PERT, and critical path method, that's your CPM. And they both have the same basic structure in the sense of activities arranged along predecessor successor relationships in a network. Okay, and you'll have starting of the project and ending of the project, and you have schedule for each activity and so on. Okay. But where they differ is PERT, program evaluation review technique, was developed by the military, and they were using, or they were this technique was being used for activities that did not have deterministic times. So they had to use probability estimates for the activity times. So their focus in PERT was coming up with probability estimates for completing the project within a certain due date. So in program evaluation review technique, or PERT, we will see, you'll see that we assume probability estimates for activity times, and then we'll compute probability. Whereas CPM was developed by, I think it was DuPont. I'm not absolutely sure, but it is by the industry, and they were looking at activity times that were deterministic. So for example, building a house, and these activities are very well known and have been repeated many times, so we can very precisely estimate how long it will take, okay, each of those activities. So there is no reason for probability estimates. Okay, like in PERT, where they were developing new systems, and some of those activities were being done for the very first time, and so there was no precise estimates of how long it will take, and we have to associate probabilities with that. That's for PERT. But for CPM, where the activities are very well known and repeated many times, so we not only can very precisely estimate how long each activity will take, we can also estimate how fast it can be done by spending more money, like crashing. So in CPM, the focus is on how much more money can we spend in order to reduce the project completion time. In other words, crashing is the focus of CPM. So CPM is more deterministic technique, and PERT is more probability oriented technique. But the underlying network structure is common for both PERT and CPM. It is how you approach. PERT takes a probability approach, CPM takes a more deterministic project crashing type of approach. So here are the basic steps that are common to both PERT and CPM. So 6 steps: define the project and define all the significant activities that are tasks that are required to be completed in the project. So develop relationships among the activities. That's your predecessor relationship. And all you need to do is, for each activity, what are the immediate predecessors? That's all you need. You don't need to go back all the way to the beginning of the project. But what is the immediate predecessor? So once you have the immediate predecessors identified, then we can lay it out in the form of a network. And there are 2 ways in which these networks can be built. One is called activity on arrow convention, where activities are represented by arrow. The beginning of the arrow represents beginning of the activity with a circle, so that will be a node. The node represents the events of start of an activity and ending of an activity. A node that is at the other end of the arrow, the pointing at, that would be the end of the activity. So when you lay out the project in this fashion, what you get is activity on arrow network. The other convention is activity on node convention, so that each node represents an activity and the arrows represent the predecessor relationships among the activities. And then once we have that and the time and the cost associated, then we can develop paths along the network. On the longest path through the network will represent the critical path. Okay, so that's the one that's going to determine when the project will ultimately be completed. So we use this network to come up with schedules, the early schedules and late schedules, and we use that to monitor the project in terms of schedule, time schedule, and budget. So in the 6 steps of PERT and CPM, the critical path is a very important concept, but all activities on the critical path represent critical activities, and any delays in these critical activities will result in the project getting delayed. So the activities that are not on the critical path, there is some amount of slack available, and we'll talk more about slack in a little bit.